I'd like to introduce my next guest. Most of you, at least in our company, we have this massive debate of whether the laptop we need to buy is a Mac or is it from Lenovo. And I can't get for the life of me how I can change anybody who's a Lenovo user to ever become a Mac user. It's just really hard. Like my CFO back there will never change. My co-founder sitting there will never change. And so we have some die-hard fans of Lenovo. And so what I'm excited about today is to have the president of direct-to-consumer for Lenovo with us. Ajit Sivadasan has run that business for almost 20 years. 20 years. And that business runs somewhere between $7 to $8 billion in commerce. Most of that, the online side of it. What I really am excited about is to actually talk about AI. Ajit has been an operator. He calls himself more of that than an evangelist of AI. We're here to talk about personalization, customer lifetime value, and how Lenovo is using AI today. Please welcome on stage Ajit Sivadasan.
It's very bright here.
It is. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
We'd love to start with just a quick intro. Obviously, I gave you my version of the intro on that one, but we'd love to hear about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Mostly luck. But like you said, 20 years. I came to Lenovo post the IBM acquisition, and with the express mandate to start a B2C business. So when we started, the business was about 100 million plus in 4 countries. And like you said, today it's 3 billion on the B2C side, SMB, B2C, and then 5 billion on the enterprise side. And we grew the business from 4 countries, expanded it from 4 to 36 countries in the last 20 years. It's not that exciting, actually. They didn't fire me, so I'm here. But it has been a journey of persistence because the bigger challenges were actually mostly people. Trying, at the time when I came, Lenovo was a 100% partner ecosystem-driven company. So trying to do direct-to-consumer was almost blasphemy, if you can use that term. So trying to get people to change their mindset about moving online at a time when it was not as fashionable. That, I would say, is probably the biggest accomplishment in the 20 years.
That's amazing. One of the things that I'm fascinated by when we spoke, and we've said this many times, is that you guys are growing in Lenovo on the e-com side between 20 to 30% on an annual basis. When you look at e-com in general, it sits between 4 to 7% at best. Obviously, you have different categories of things. But for a brand that's been around that long, it's hard to see that. How do you do it? What's the secret? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I think everybody says these things. So if I repeat myself and it sounds obvious, it's the truth. I think it starts with customers, obviously, having clarity on what's important to our customers. We do spend a lot of time really understanding what drives the customer. That's one. In the last 10 years, and especially after COVID, it's primarily, I think, because the shift to online is accelerating. So if you look at the broad categories where they're growing 4 or 5%, I mean, you have people like Amazon and Walmart and others who are big players. And so obviously their scale is much, much bigger. For us, I think the traditional side of the business, I think moving online, other than Dell, has been kind of a hedge where people have kind of paid a lot more attention to channel and distribution. So I think partly it's because people are wanting to move because people feel it's convenient. I think COVID, in some ways, taught us that it's easy to order something online. And then secondly, I think it is about, for me at least, building a team that really understands the fundamentals really well, is focused, is ambitious, wants to, has an entrepreneurial mindset to kind of drive change relative to what others are doing, like Amazon. So it's a combination of things, but I think ultimately it comes down to really being focused on the customer.
And speaking of that, one of the things that you see is we've gone from different generations of buyers. Effectively, we've gone from the millennials to the Gen Zs to the next, and there's going to be more, obviously, over time. And so the question that you probably are obsessing about is how do you get newer generations to think about your products? How do you think about that? And what strategies do you sort of employ?
Yeah, so that's been a huge challenge because, I mean, just to be completely candid, if you look at Gen Zs and even millennials, I mean, 10 years ago, they were kind of in the same age bracket as the Gen Zs. There is a disproportionate focus on Apple. And for the right reasons, right? Maybe the right reasons and maybe some wrong reasons, like the people that you cannot convert over from ThinkPad to Mac explains why. But I think for us, the journey of looking at millennials and Gen Zs started maybe 5 years ago. And clearly, my intent at the time was to really say, if we did not win over this audience, in the long run, it would be very difficult to change brand preference. So we started focusing in on the customer and asking the question, what is it that we have that they don't? So the biggest difference is, as an example, explicitly, gaming as a portfolio is something that is big for us, which a lot of Mac users use their machines for gaming, but it's not something that they focus on explicitly. So I felt like that was at least clearly a hook for us in the short term. And then our focus on students to really try and figure out how can we influence that ecosystem in a more direct way. The segment approach, so we have 4 segments that we focus on. One is SMBs, which is a big part of our business. Then there is gaming, then there are students, and now creators. With this whole creator economy, I think that's become a huge segment for us. So it really was to try and figure out how to focus on something that they really want, and how do we build a value proposition around that? How do we start talking directly with them? How do we have a marketing campaign that talks about why they want to think about Lenovo first? So it was very deliberate, and it's been actually quite difficult. Gaming, we have a lot of traction. With the student segment, it's a little bit more challenging because a lot of the student purchases happen through the educational institutions, and there's all kinds of challenges in trying to do that, particularly in North America. Actually, surprisingly, we see a lot more progress in Asia Pacific, where we have done well with the student category. Like India, as an example, we do extremely well. 50% of our revenue comes from students. So it's been a long journey, but I think trying to get that value proposition cleaned out and relentlessly focusing in on every single day. And in your marketing, in the way you talk about the customer journey, in trying to create things that matters to them. As an example, community is a big thing that gamers like. Because that's one place where they can talk about things with people that they respect or they want to kind of game with. So we built a community 5 years ago. And it was slow trying to pick up. But now we have like 500,000 people in the community. So trying to really understand what a customer gets influenced by and then trying to then stay the course and execute relentlessly, I think that's the answer. But it's not easy. Some segments it's easy. Some segments it's a little bit more difficult. Students and gaming has been a little bit more challenging.
Definitely. Very interesting. I mean, I think you balance this growth opportunities that come with it, and you're driving the 20 to 30% growth. But there's the other side of the market as well that comes with competition and the cost pressures that go with it. And so you have to balance how you manage to the cost side of it while driving top-line growth of 20 to 30%. What are some of the things that you've had to deal with, or your view on the market related to the cost side of the business?
See, so post-COVID, costs have escalated, and they've not come down as rapidly as we would have liked. So one of the downsides of the business is increasing OpEx. So that is clearly a priority for us. We have been working on trying to figure out how to scale. And a big part of a direct business is credit card fees is like 3%, marketing is like 3%, people about 3%. So you can think about this as a 10% business to run from our standpoint. And then the geographic complexity of trying to manage a dispersed organization adds another 2 to 3%. Now, inflation and some of the cost escalations have probably accounted for like 2 to 3% over the last 4 or 5 years. So what we have to do ultimately is to say, hey, how do we continue to drive automation where we can? A big part of the small and medium business also relies on call centers. So how do we make sure that our call center efficiency is high? And then the big one is marketing. How do we continue to scale marketing in a non-linear fashion that allows us to then get disproportionate advantage in terms of reach, frequency, and ultimately conversion?
Well said. And so that brings us to more of where AI is starting to get a lot of hype. Some ways real, some places not so real. As you look at the market and think about it, I think you call yourself a practitioner of AI, not an evangelist. How do you separate real value from AI from what is hype?
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you have heard of Acemoglu, who is the MIT economist who challenged basically AI as a hype and said that most of the projections are overblown. His claim is that if you see a 1 to 2% GDP growth in the next 10 years, that would be optimistic. So that's one camp, and you cannot ignore the guy because he won a Nobel Prize. And then there is the other camp, which is people who are selling products and services and ecosystem who are basically saying, or even Elon Musk as an example, who I met last year at Cannes. And his contention was that in the future, he did not give a time frame, but he said in the future, nobody's going to work. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, right? So I think the answer lies somewhere in between, in my mind. We have taken, at least I have taken a personal view that the biggest advantage right now is to focus on efficiency, which is how do you automate predictable things? Whether that is content, you look at the customer value chain and you say, look, whether that's content, fraud, demand planning, supply chain, any of those things, they're all very predictable things. How do you build predictable models at lower cost without human beings? I think that's something that's doable. But even that, I think it'll require some work for us to get really good at. But I think that as a place to start, I find it more comfortable and more easier to convince people than trying to say, well, somehow we are going to change this thing to be completely people-free and everything is going to happen. All you have to do is think about it. I don't think I belong to that camp for sure. So I've been focused primarily on how do we really drive efficiency to the point where we can take measurable benefits in OpEx.
Yeah, and to a large extent, you either go the growth side or the OpEx side. And so as you think about that, with your focus over there, what are some of the specific areas you've seen where there's actual measurable impact with what you've got to implement?
Look, I mean, like I said, in the customer value chain, if you look at it, we rely a lot on translations. We rely a lot on content. We rely a lot on trying to get content on the glass in real time, forecasting, network optimization from a transportation side, supply chain management. So there's a number of those things that we are looking at. They're all things under purview, and we use it. Your own business, as an example, search, customer journey analytics. So several of those things, personalization, several of those things I think are very real, and those I think you're going to get benefits out of it. Those are things that we are working on. The other one is dynamic pricing, as an example, for those of you who are in retail. So dynamic pricing, as an example, is not something that we could do that easily, but now I think with the algorithms, you can actually get some measurable benefits out of it. Things that are not staying up to the hype are people saying, hey, somehow we are going to be able to run marketing without people. Gen AI is going to solve all your problems. I find that a little difficult simply because I think that there is going to be a creative need for us to touch some of these things. And some of the models, I mean, the bigger challenge for us is whenever we talk about external-facing content, we are worried about hallucinations of the models, incorrect information, legal exposure, and blatant misrepresentation of information sometimes. So you have to be extremely careful, and you need governance at the company level to make sure that you're not walking into a trap that's going to cost you billions of dollars in brand damage or reputation and other things, which we are worried about. So that's the way I'm thinking about it, at least.
Makes sense. And you mentioned a few things in between that as use cases. You talked about hyper-personalization. We actually had somebody mention that in the previous session. You talked about pricing. You also talked about fraud and a few other elements that came with it. When you think about what is the most overhyped use case for AI, and what's an actual good use case of AI, do you have any recommendations of what the audience can take away from that?
Well, I can speak in generic terms.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, I have not spent a minute thinking about some spacecraft coming in, changing the world, or robots taking over the world. Those are not things I think about. Yeah. I think about very measurable, very material things that I can say, okay, if I'm going to give you $1, what are you going to give me in return? And if I don't get the return, then that's probably not a good use case. But look, I mean, the biggest way to think about this, right? I was in preparation for this, I was kind of thinking about this. I think, like, if you think about autonomous driving, so we've been talking about autonomous driving for 10 years, and everybody's been saying, hey, there's going to be no need for you to have a car, and everything is going to be automated. But we have found out the hard way that it's difficult. So when complexity is high and there is unpredictability in the variables, I think it becomes challenging. So is autonomous vehicles, will that become a reality with no intervention in the next 5 years? I doubt it. I think that there is going to be continued pressure on safety and other issues. So the technology has to catch up. It will eventually, but I don't think in the short run it will. Things that are working, if you think about medicine is a good area. I think discovery of molecules, diagnosis of diseases, certain fields being fully automated, radiology as an example, being fully automated. So there's a number of areas where I think the use cases are real. Manufacturing automation, robotics, all of those things which are very predictable, you see a lot more progress being made.
Well said. And shifting gears a little bit from just the pure AI and how you've been thinking about it, going back to the concept of growth versus efficiency, there's an element of efficiency that you've talked about where the application becomes super valuable. As you think about your business where you've actually had practical applications, what is one most cost-effective thing that you've put in place that has meaningfully moved the business in the most recent times?
You mean AI or?
In general, I would say it would be interesting if there's an AI cost-effective thing that has made it to your top of the list. But if not, just thinking about retailers today and trying to manage efficiency, what are some of the things, or at least one thing that you think people can look at and say it meaningfully moves the needle from a cost perspective?
Look, I mean, like I said, the variables are minimum, right? It's like 3 variables. It's people, it's marketing, and it's things like credit card fees and other things. Yeah. So let's talk about payments. Yeah. So 3% is too high, right? I think payment should be much, much lower than 3%. I would love to see crypto become a standard. At some point it will, hopefully sooner than later, so that the cost associated with processing payments goes down. Look, the way I think about the business is quite different because the opportunity, like our business on the B2C side, SMB side is like $3 billion, but I think it should be 10. So the opportunity exists. So to me, it's all about how do we get very efficient in terms of how we target our audiences, how do we get more data that allows us to make better decisions in terms of conversion, how do we continue to drive development at a much faster rate than what we do today, so that we can introduce new features that allow our customers to make better decisions or have a better experience. So the experience piece, I think, is really important, and it keeps changing. See, the biggest thing is the digital generation, when they are coming into the workforce, their expectations are much higher and much different than the previous generation. And so our ability to actually deal with that positively or negatively will impact your business. So anybody who is really thinking about the future should really be thinking, you're going to deal with a generation that is going to be pretty vehement about usability and user experience being really important, and that cannot be overstated. So we have to all really focus on what makes it tick. And then for people like us who are part of this bigger ecosystem of a company that e-commerce is a small part of their business, we have to contend with people like Amazon and others who are pure play e-commerce players. Their entire job is to continue to reinvent themselves every day. And so trying to keep up with that is also challenging, right? But we have to, because that's what sets our customer expectation. So we have to, in some ways, at least try to match that, or at least be a fast follower. Otherwise, it ends up hurting you.
And when it comes to AI, you mentioned you've been doing a lot of experiments, and you've been experimenting pretty aggressively. What are one or two things that you found during those experiments that surprised you? And were they positive or negative? I'd love to hear a couple of those.
You know, the biggest one that we have seen, that I've seen that's interesting, is really creative. So using Gen AI to measure creative effectiveness. So in the past, it was, and by the way, this has been going on for several years now, so it's not new news. But the ability for us to really test creatives at scale before we actually put that in market, I think is phenomenal. Because I can actually look at a creative now and say, if I control these 4 or 5 variables, I can improve the effectiveness of the creative as it would land. That's a huge deal, right? I mean, think about the fact that a company that spends $1 billion in marketing, and if you're able to improve your effectiveness of your creatives in almost real time or before you actually go through the process, that's a huge deal. So those are things that I think are very exciting and they are interesting. Personalization is interesting. The ability for us to really land a message to the customer during the journey in real time to a trigger that it doesn't have to be just the creative, but it's just based on the behavior that they show. Can you do something to interrupt that journey with a positive outcome? Whether that is serving an ad that makes sense or a message that makes sense, being able to do that at scale. I mean, we get 400 million people coming to the website. If I can move that needle even by 0.01%, that's a huge impact, huge impact. So those are all things that we are looking at. I'm not necessarily saying that we have discovered the secret sauce yet, right? It's a series of experiments. We have to keep kind of trying, keep getting it better. But I think eventually those are things that's going to pay out if we are going to be focused and do the right things.
I'm curious about that one because that's super interesting. Everybody gets a lot to their website. Conversion rates are really low. Just being able to move the needle a little bit gets you a lot more. Have you seen one or two things in the creatives work specifically, or is that too close to the detail that probably?
No. So look, at any given time on our website, there's probably about 50 experiments running. So our usability teams, they're running like 50 experiments, various things, you know, cart, checkout, creative execution, external, internal, all those things are happening. And we are continuously improving. So clearly, I mean, it's not just a question of acquiring customers, also our conversion rates are improving. So those things work, but the problem is it cannot be static. Like it's not one and done. You cannot do it and then say, okay, now it's all done. You have to continuously change because the environment is changing. So you have to continue to have this culture of experimentation and trying to not be happy with what you have, but continue to keep evolving that experience.
And is that a big part of the change that also comes with the organization, the cultural change of experimentation, and because this is new, we've got to try? And how have you sort of pushed that through in this time?
Well, I mean, so if you're running an e-commerce business, you have to really have that sense, right? Because it's so dynamic, and there are so many variables, and a lot of things happen in real time. And if your ability to actually make decisions or get insights in real time means a lot. Yeah. So that's something that we have to invest in. But then you also have to find the right set of people. You have to find the right set of partners who are willing to do that. You have to have an IT infrastructure and a platform that allows you to do that. So it's a mindset change. So the company, as an example, we are a traditional company that does waterfall, write the requirements, then everybody kind of talks about it, then you give it to IT, then IT looks at it, they say, so after the fighting, 6 months later, you get a feature. Now, we're talking about how do you release code every week, every day, and how do we learn from it? How do you not worry about building everything to perfection, but try and work to an MVP and then iterate? So that takes a lot of work, because you have to change your IT organization to support it, right? It requires a different type of mindset. So it's a combination of things. It's not easy. So we started this journey almost 10 years ago, okay, right? And then in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, we have gotten better at it. But the ability for us to really focus in on making changes in real time with inputs that come and being able to test it in real time, those things make a huge difference.
Amazing. And when you think about one thing you've tested that you've found to be more on the negative side, is there anything like that? Obviously, on the positive side, you've seen plenty of things. Is there anything negative that's been interesting?
I mean, we have a lot of, so all these tests, 50 tests we do, not everything works, yeah, right? Many of them actually fail. And the things that fail, we discard. So, as an example, 3-4 years ago, we did something on price predictability, in terms of, hey, what is a point at which a customer will stop buying, as an example? Can we do it dynamically? So we tried to do that. It was very complex. It wouldn't scale. The inputs, we found that some of the things were behavioral, which we couldn't account in the model, because most of it was based on past data. So we had to discard that model and rethink how to think about pricing, right? So, I mean, there are probably 100 use cases that have failed. So we fail equal amount of times than winning. So, but that's part of the deal.
That is, yeah, for sure. Well, let's shift a little bit from the efficiency side and the growth to a little bit forward-looking. If you look, say, 5 years out, as you think about what's changing in the landscape now, you've got the tariff side of things, you've got AI coming in, competition, pricing. What do you think is going to be the biggest change in how businesses operate in 5 years? At least the commerce side of it.
From a commerce standpoint, look, the biggest challenge, the biggest opportunity is the ability for us to get very granular with the psychographic and demographic information that's available for customers. Today's targeting, I think, in many ways, is still it's hit and miss. Some companies do it well, some companies don't do it as well. But the reality is that the opportunity for us to understand a customer's behavior much more granularly exists. And the companies that are able to do that, both on the supply and the demand side, and if you can match those, I think that will be a breakthrough. So what does that mean? So my sense is that today, in the marketing that we do, we probably waste, 20% or 25% of our money simply because we are off in our targeting. I think that's an area which we are going to figure out by a number of things, competitive information, browsing experience information, CRM data, call center data. If you can really try and combine those two, the demand signal and the consumption signal, I think you have the opportunity to really reduce waste. And at scale, it makes a lot of sense, right? You're talking about if somebody is spending $1 billion in marketing, you can save, let's say, $100 million. So that's massively impactful. So I think that you will start seeing personalized experiences evolve and become much more sophisticated.
All across the customer journey, whether that's from acquisition all the way down.
Yes. That would be the holy grail, to being able to do both in real time. So today it's very asynchronous.
Yeah.
We get the data, we analyze, then next campaign we'll do something. By the time everything is changed. So what you really want to do is get all of these signals that informs your buying, and then on the website, when the customer comes as an example, or in your call center, you understand enough that you can turn the knob to drive your conversion events.
Very interesting. Do you think there are products in the market that do that today? Or is that something you think will be built over time?
Yeah, anybody who's going to get an advantage will probably have to build those things. Yeah.
So it's custom built in-house.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say they can do it, but
yeah.
I have not found people who I trust yet. So let's put it that way.
Got it. For leaders in the audience, as we navigate sort of uncertain times, we've got, as you know, tariffs coming in. You posted a great LinkedIn post about just stay calm, like everything will work itself out. I think I saw that a couple of days ago. What's one piece of advice you'd give to future-proof their business, if anything?
I mean, I'll just say what I started with, right? Focus on the customer. A lot of things that people talk about are all the shiny things. Focus on really basics. Do the basics really well. And the basics are really non-sexy. It's a grind. It's the customer saying, why is my credit card hold going on for 40 days? Or why is my return taking so long? Or where is my product? So basic things. So if we focus on, this all assumes that you have a good product and good brand or decent brand. Okay, if those things don't work, then obviously you have a different problem. But assuming that you have all of those things, I think trying to really, really do the basics well, I think matters a lot. And I'll give an example, right? I mean, you can. So I'll just make Lenovo the scapegoat in this one. So look, if you're a technology company and the expectation is that you understand technology. Now, the fact that we are selling technology doesn't mean that our website is going to have all of the kind of bells and whistles that Amazon has, as an example, right? It's not practical. But the reality is the ability for the customer to form an opinion about you or your brand, that you're a technology company and you're doing, you have a website that doesn't load up in a reasonable period of time, or you're on your phone and you try to look for something, it doesn't react the same way, or a chatbot that you implemented doesn't give you the right results. That's all reflective of you as a brand. So you need to kind of make sure that those things are resolved. So really, really focus on managing and over-delivering on the customer expectation. That, to me, if you do that really well, you will have a solid customer base, a loyal customer base.
So don't think about all of the new stuff in the moments like these. Get the basics right on which you can build. All right, we're in our last section. I want to bridge to a little bit on the people and leadership side. You've been at this 20 years. You've seen probably every flavor of business growth, slowing down, different markets, but it ultimately was a lot about the people. You have to push them. I think when we spoke, you mentioned if there's 30% growth, I'm pushing people to think, how do we get there and what do we need to do related to that? And so you're challenging conventional thinking a lot of these times. What's one leadership lesson you've learned sort of the hard way?
You can't be complacent. Yeah. I think what happens is, there's a book, right? Good is the enemy of great. And that's very true. So when you're moderately successful, it's very easy to get complacent. And so I think we have to constantly remind ourselves and the teams that are working to say, you just cannot be complacent because the marketplace is not complacent. There are competitors who are willing to take your place. There are customers who are going to be impatient and not satisfied with what you're delivering. So you really have to make sure that you have a culture that guards against complacency. To me, that's the number one. And number two, I would say, is to empower your people to make mistakes. So figure out how to fail fast, figure out how to have dissent, change, make people uncomfortable. It's okay. have people, push back. Because oftentimes, contrary to popular belief, when there is dissent and when there is conversation and there's a little bit of a struggle, I think great ideas come. And that, as a culture, you should encourage with no downside. When people feel like that happens and somebody's job is on the line, then that becomes a problem. But if you can make that become your culture, that's powerful.
You've been at it 20 years. What keeps you motivated? What keeps you excited about this?
20 years have passed. I don't even know how, but I think the environment, the challenges have always been there. So all of us wake up in the morning to solve a problem. So I think as long as problems are there, you can be motivated. So I have plenty of problems.
Well said. We'll open it up to questions in a minute. And the last thing that I wanted to just ask you is, obviously we're in the tough times right now, or the uncertain times. If you had to take away everything we discussed and give e-com leaders, people running business lines across the board, one piece of advice on what to think about and how to think about their businesses, what would that one piece of advice be if you're sort of building your career in e-commerce right now?
Well, e-commerce is not going anywhere. I tell everybody, at some point in the future, I don't know about AI, but everything is going to be commerce online. So if you have a job in e-commerce, I would say stay put. Good things will happen. I mean, look, all this tariff stuff is going to go away at some point. I mean, none of these things are going to stay. These are all, political posturing, which is all going to go away. But world in general is moving towards a interesting time. I think there's so much excitement. Whether you believe in the hype or not, technology has made society a better place in terms of being able to do things faster and cheaper and convenient. And if you really think about places like India and China and other places, I mean, the standard of living has continuously gone up. So I mean, it's not without its own faults of mental health problems and some of those other things. Those exist, but in general, the standard of living for human beings and society has gone up. So I think it'll only accelerate.
Very good. Before we end, could we open it up to questions for anyone? Anybody have things that they want to ask Ajit or talk about their business?
I've got the microphone here. Oh, right here.
Sure. Thanks for taking my question. Matt Petrocelli from Lowe's. You were talking about credit card transaction fees. I agree they're high. And taking crypto out of it and the competition, because I look at credit, it's like big tobacco, right? As retailers selling stuff, you sell stuff, we sell stuff. How do we get that down? I look at like the real estate. They recently had that decision where commission could now be, worked on. It's not that blanket across the industry. How do we do that as retailers, people that sell stuff, to put pressure?
Very controversial question. How many people are here from credit card companies? Anybody?
They're not going to put their hands up now because you asked. Like that.
I mean, look, the question is, can it be disintermediated? Is it a fair price? And they would have you believe that it is. But the reality is, I think that it's not. So couple of things that I'm thinking about. Maybe you guys can join in on this with us. Can you take cash? Can you do cash on delivery? Can you start promoting one credit card company over the other on the website? Start getting leverage. So those are all things that we are looking at to say, hey, if you're going to have 80% of my business, you need to give me a better rate, right? I'm not going to give you a retail rate. Give me wholesale rate. So part of it is that, but the reason why crypto becomes interesting is the transaction fees associated with that can be brought down quite substantially. But it is a policy decision for the company to kind of figure out how they are going to back it up. What's the mechanism to go do that? If the transactions are high enough, I think there is value in exploring that. But right now, what we are thinking about is to say, how do we monetize credit more favorably, or what other alternatives can we give, or should I charge the customer some part of it as a deterrent? Without, obviously that's a dangerous game, but you got to figure out how to do that. But will I be able to reduce that by incenting them to take on a different payment method if they can save more money? So those are all things, practical things that we can look at today. But eventually, I think credit card fees have to be sub 1%, is my contention.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question or gives you the...
It answers. Cash on delivery is kind of rough sometimes. I laugh at some of the businesses that give the cash discount, but it's really just the regular price when you pay with the credit card. That's smaller businesses. You know what I mean? When they say it's a
I go to my dry cleaners and they say, look, we'll give you 3.5% back if you pay cash.
Well, I like that. That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very practical way of looking at it. I thought about it. I said, man, that sounds interesting. Because it's valuable. If I can move 20% of my business, that's real money.
Yeah, but I think you nailed it. Like loyalty to one credit card company, or we're starting a rewards platform. We have it. We're continuing to evolve with it. But I think you nailed it with that. And obviously crypto to get into the game.
We have a rewards platform too, so that's the other answer. So that's also something we're thinking about.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's give a big round of applause
Thank you.
to both gentlemen.